Welcome back to the Vajrasana Broadcasting Studio. So we continue with the third instalment in our series entitled How to Live Your Life. A few weeks ago, well quite a few weeks ago, when we planned this series, we didn't imagine, couldn't have foreseen how the circumstances of all our lives might have changed. We've been precipitated into the unfamiliar in many ways, but the practices and teachings of the Buddha, I think they're applicable and appropriate and helpful at all times, all places, in all circumstances. So we'll see what we can do tonight, okay? So, how to live your life. Now, I'm not telling you what to do. Some of us may have an increased sensitivity to having people tell us what to do at the minute, but that's not what's happening here. I don't think the Buddha, there's not many records that I can think of the Buddha telling people what to do. And I don't think Buddhism tells people what to do. It offers suggestions. The Buddha offered suggestions. And that's all I'm doing here this evening, and all we're doing in this series. We're offering suggestions. Try them out. See if they work. See what the effects of putting them into practice are. So the series is based around, to start with, what traditionally are known as the 5 precepts. Now the precepts are ethical guidelines in Buddhism. They're not commandments, they're guidelines. And they're also sources of inspiration for us. Because it's said that the way an enlightened being, a Buddha or any other enlightened person, would act, would spontaneously, without them even thinking, they would be acting in accordance with these precepts. Okay. So they're both something to guide us and, if you like, the light to which we might wish to be guided. So last week, Yana Ruchi talked about generosity, the practice and the quality of generosity. The week before that, the first of this series, Druddhakaran talked about the possibilities, the outcomes of practicing more loving kindness. Now, if we want there to be more love, more generosity in the world, we can't make that happen out there. We would wish it to be so, but we can't force it. We can't make others be loving or generous. We ourselves have to take responsibility for developing, cultivating, nurturing those qualities. This is axiomatic in Buddhist practice. The only thing we can control and do anything about is our own thoughts, speech and behaviour. And controlling perhaps isn't the right word here either, as we will see later on this evening. More encouraging. So this week, the precept, the third precept we're going to look at, encourages us, inspires us to develop and to express stillness, simplicity and contentment, or at least something of those qualities. Well, stillness, simplicity and contentment. Well, contentment, yes please. Anyone not want contentment out there? Not sure. But contentment seems to be something that, as human beings, in a way we're striving for. We could call it security, we could call it satisfaction, but contentment. But how to get contentment? How does that come about? Stillness and simplicity maybe don't fit so easily into our 21st century lives. Looking at my life, other people's lives, the world around, there often seems to be not a lot of stillness, not too much simplicity. Though those qualities perhaps might become more particularly relevant in our present situation. I certainly feel that for myself. And maybe, that part issue will become clearer as I talk on. So I'm going to explore why those three qualities are put together, if you like, rather than just generosity. In this precept, there's three: stillness, simplicity, and contentment. In fact, I'm going to suggest that they are related in a very particular way, and that you could see them as being progressive. The one quality maybe grows out of a foundation of the other. Important to stress, I'll do it here, is that what we're talking about here is not any passive or acquiescent state of being, okay? And I'll come on to that and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so, stillness. Well, hopefully, we've just had a bit of that. We've had a go at that, a bit of stillness. Okay, we've been meditating. And I'm sure all of you, most of you, will have had the experience of meditating. That's a very particular focused attention on being still. Physical stillness. Even just sitting in a chair, like you might be doing now and I'm doing. I'm trying to be as still as possible, but I'll move around a little bit. No doubt I might even cough and sneeze, and if I do, I assure you, I'm 99% certain it's hay fever. Okay, so there may well be a bit of unstillness issuing from me, but I'm relatively still sitting here talking to you, and you're relatively still, hopefully, listening to me. Sitting in a chair then, lying in bed awake, and then particularly in meditation, or just sitting, standing, looking out the window, looking at a tree. So if we are in a state of physical stillness, what happens then? What do you become aware of when you sit still in the chair, or particularly if you meditate? What do you become aware of? Well, maybe firstly some aches, pains, itches, irritation physically. But above that, we still the body, and the likelihood is that what we become aware of, first of all and most strongly, is how unstill our minds are. That can be an uncomfortable experience sometimes, can be painful even. There's a technical term Buddhist term for the kind of tendency of the mind to not rest in stillness, and that's prapancha. And it suggests this kind of ever restless, unfolding, running after one thing after another energy that is actually, what our minds are most of the time. Traditionally, it's known as the monkey mind. That's what we have, continually chattering and swinging from branch to branch and climbing up, climbing down, grabbing this, grabbing that. Okay, prapancha. And we have to accept that that is the way our minds work, normally. And the quality of the rest of our experience, as Buddhism tells us, arises from the state of our minds. Maybe that's why we keep so active, not in a mindful, healthy way, but more neurotically. My screen just went off there, so I'd rather talk to the Buddha and you than the blank screen. I think it's going to keep doing that, so technology. Anyway, yes, the unstill mind. The mind went off there for a minute. Maybe that's can often be the reason why we're more kind of physically active. Perhaps we keep ourselves going, we push ourselves, we look for exciting distraction, not in a mindful, healthy way, but perhaps more neurotically. We find sometimes what our mind is doing and our lack of ability to control it uncomfortable. And depending what our mind's dwelling on, sometimes painful. I'm sure that's more often the case, or it's more focused, more highlit now than normally in our lives. There's so much for us that's unfamiliar for our minds to try and get hold of. Anxieties about ourselves, about others, about the world, about what's going to happen. What food am I going to get hold of? How am I going to spend my day? What's going to happen about work? What's going to happen about money? I mean, all those questions are just kind of arising for us like a fountain probably a lot of the time. And that's uncomfortable. So, what can we do about that? Well, as I said, we've just been doing something. We've been practicing meditation. And I think this is primarily the one thing as practicing Buddhists that can help us with this whole issue. Okay. Not just meditation. We can't do it now. Our retreat centre is closed, but going on retreat, we spend more time in stillness than we probably normally do in our lives, okay? And we get used to it and we have that experience of it. And I think maybe that for a lot of people, there's a degree of enforced stillness happening for them right now as we kind of shut in our homes, limited in what we can do. And maybe it's possible to see that as an opportunity. Okay, a challenge, but an opportunity as well. We will see. But why is stillness important? Why is this a quality that we are kind of wanting, needing to develop? Well, if we want to get rid and get to grips, perhaps not get rid of, but get to grips, maybe even tame our restless mind, quieten our monkey minds down, we probably need to start with that basic physical practice of just sitting still, meditating, spending time just doing nothing, even for a short while. And although the mind will take off, that will have the physical stillness will have its effects over time, particularly if we practice it regularly. And then we need that stillness. We need the stillness. We need to try and cultivate a greater stillness of mind through meditation, through general mindfulness, through spending time not rushing around. We need that mental stillness because we need a mental space. We need a mental and emotional space to try and see what is happening, to see what's happening out there, see what's happening internally with us, and to be able to have the time, if you like, to reflect on it. So, in another probably familiar phase to most of you, we need some stillness of body and some stillness of mind in order to find the gap. Okay, that space in our experience that enables us to choose what we pay attention to choose how we're going to respond to the experiences that we have as they arise. If we don't have that space, then we can't really genuinely choose, or very rarely. And if we don't choose what we're paying attention to and how we're reacting, someone else will for us. Maybe our conditioning, our habits, the sort of culture that we live in, the prevailing views. All of these things will influence what we pay attention to, how we pay attention to it, and what we think, speak, and act. So through stillness we can create, through creating more stillness, we create a greater possibility of a life of more real choice. Choice is again a pertinent word at present. So we are perhaps finding our choices are limited, and it's interesting to see how we are able to respond to that. I'll come back to that in a minute. So stillness, and everyone is getting that, enforced stillness to some extent, that is more so than usual, is difficult for us. It's difficult for me in particular. But can you see it as an opportunity to practice, to see what it's like, to see what comes of it? Okay. So stillness. So the second of these three qualities referred to in this precept is simplicity. So, do you find the idea of simplicity attractive? Some way, does it speak to you? Does some part of you respond to it? If so, I think it's worth taking that response seriously and reflecting on it and what it might mean for you. As I said, at present there are limits on the enormous range of choice that we're so used to in our society, our culture. And maybe we take them for granted. To quote Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And our lives, with all our commitments of work, family, friends, geographically spread and diverse, is very different maybe to the simplicity of life at the time of the Buddha. And that's something we have to work with and take on board. More on the Buddha and simplicity later. But I think we can make moves to simplify our lives, or let's say to introduce more simplicity into our lives in all kinds of ways. And sometimes a number of small things can add up to a significant difference. Maybe just changing the routine of your life make a difference. I just thought myself, what two things came to mind um, in terms of where I could make small changes in my life. And the one question came up for me is, how many kinds of tea do I need? Okay, that was one. And then, sorry, just readjusting the technology. And okay, so how many different threads do I follow in a day into the internet rabbit warren that, as we know, is so difficult to get out of sometimes? Sometimes it's difficult to envisage making big differences in our life in terms of simplifying. Maybe we can do that. Maybe we have to do that. Circumstances force it upon us, as at present. But small things can add up and can make a difference. You can start a positive snowball effect, maybe. So, as I've said, through establishing moments of stillness, whether longer moments as in meditation, or if we can somehow in the rush of our everyday experience, we can get the space to better discriminate between what it is we merely want or feel like and what we really need. And we can reflect and maybe savour what things and activities and views maybe lead to some experience of contentment, and what might lead to a greater discontentment. So we need that space, we need that gap, we need that stillness of body and mind to be able to reflect on this. And reflecting on this is a way of seeing what it is we need, what it is we don't want, what holds us back, what helps us move forward in a positive way in life. And that's a step or a number of steps towards simplicity. The conclusions, if we think about this, might often surprise us. We can find that we're happier without some things that we thought were absolutely essential to us feeling okay about ourselves and the world. And I leave you to your own reflections on that. Okay. But that might be one way of thinking of metta, self-metta. Okay. I'm just going to mention one, I think, very important aspect of simplicity, and that's doing one thing at a time, okay? That elusive, or seemingly unattainable sometimes, state of being, doing one thing at a time. And this is a tough one for us, of course. So much of our makeup and the way our mind works, which has probably got an evolutionary and a survival sort of backing to it, sort of involves us being able to do one thing and thinking of other things, of carrying out one action whilst keeping an eye out for possibilities or threats from another direction. But it can also be, as we know, exhausting and disintegrating as well to our sort of awareness and sense of ourselves. I know from my own experience as a painter, say in the studio, I've probably learnt the hard way, that thinking about the outcome, concerning myself and probably getting anxious about the outcome of the painting I'm engaged in is quite often self-fulfilling. I've kind of learned over time to very much just, if you like, be with the process, bring myself back to the moment of what I'm doing, and just allowing, if you like, the painting to develop and grow in its own way. The end results are much better, and I'm usually much more satisfied with them. Okay, so that end gaming, that concerning oneself too much about the outcome in a way that doesn't help, is a way. Working with that is a way of simplifying the mind and what our mind does. So doing one thing at a time is something worth reflecting on and seeing if we can carry that practice as a practice of mindfulness to some extent into our everyday lives. And I'll just say something else about simplicity. I think actually it's something of absolute vital importance, and that is that I think it's the great gift, one of the great gifts, but one of the most appropriate, pertinent great gifts that Buddhism might have to bring to the world. The ideal and the inspiration of simplicity and the guidance towards being able to live a more simple life. Okay, being able to live freer from our neurotic wants, cravings, expectations of what should happen and what we should have, I think is something that the world needs and will need more and more in a purely practical way. Okay? So simplicity, it's a gift as an example that we have to give to the world. So, we're moving on here to contentment, okay? Contentment. Well, contentment seems to me a little bit different in a way, true contentment. Maybe with some stillness, some degree of simplification, if only temporarily, like when we're meditating or on retreat, say, we might actually get a glimpse of some true contentment. A contentment that's not dependent or not so dependent on exterior factors. Now, this can often be quite subtle. I readily notice if I'm discontent, but sometimes a state of contentment can be more subtle. So we maybe just need to look out for it and recognise it if it's there. Don't do anything with it, just allow it to be there. If we leave it alone, it'll grow. But I think contentment's a bit different, because I think maybe you can't do contentment in a way. You could do stillness, we can do simplicity, there's actions that we can take. But I think true contentment actually arises on the basis of the practice of stillness and simplicity. I recognised some time ago that I used to think, particularly when I was younger, or much younger, that the only way to contentment, and I knew I wanted to feel contented, was to cram as much food, experience, distraction, sex, activity, whatever as I could in, until I was sated and didn't want any more, full up if you like. And of course one finds out, but it takes a long time to learn that that is very temporary as a solution, and actually potentially harmful, certainly spiritually harmful. So contentment, true contentment, maybe doesn't arise like that. It arises from being free, more free, feeling more free of exterior factors. our state of mind being less dictated to us by what's happening, what we have, okay, what our expectations are. So we can have, maybe we do, glimpse, we have moments when we contemplate some little glimpse of true contentment. But I think that there's an ideal here that we can contemplate to inspire us with this. That ideal is the Buddha. So we come to the Buddha, and there's a story which comes from the tradition in various versions. I can't actually find one particular canonical reference to it. But the story goes something like this. There's the king at the time of the Buddha, King Ajatasattu. Him and the Buddha have a bit of history between them. But the Buddha goes to see or visits King Ajatasattu at his palace. So the King Ajatasattu comes out of his palace, down the steps, and there's the Buddha standing at the foot of the steps in his robes, ragged robes, barefooted, holding his crude wooden begging bowl. And they exchange the normal courteous greetings, of course. It seems the Buddha usually complied with the social mores of the time. And then they got into conversation. And they got into conversation about the subject of happiness and contentment. And the King Ajatasattu looks at the Buddha and says, "Look at you. I mean, I'm much more happy than you. I must be much more happy than you. Look at you, barefoot, dirty, ragged robes, no roof over your head, feeding on scraps that the people give you out of generosity. Look at me. Look at my palace here. Look at my kit, my gear, my clothes, my wives, my elephants, my ministers, my servants, my musicians. Of course I'm happier than you." So the Buddha never really sort of usually gets into a confrontational, argumentative style. Well, the Buddha just says, "Okay, so be it. But let me ask you a question, King. If we were both to sit here on these steps, maybe sit here for 30 minutes, do you think you could be happy just sitting here? We're doing nothing, we're just sitting here for 30 minutes? King says, "Well, yeah, of course I can do that." The Buddha says, "Okay, that's good. Okay, so we sit here for an hour. Will you be happy sitting here together with me for an hour, not doing anything?" King says, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can do that." The Buddha says, "Well, okay. So are you happy to sit here for 2 hours, not doing anything?" Yeah, I can do that." And so it goes on. The Buddha goes, "Okay, well, how about sitting for 4 hours? I've got things to do, and I can't sort of be sitting here all day long," says the king. The Buddha says, "Well, okay, how about 8 hours? No, I couldn't do that, I don't think," says the king. So the Buddha says, "Well, look, let me tell you, I can sit here for an hour, I can sit here for 2 hours, I can sit here for 4 hours, 8 hours, I can sit here for 2 days, I can sit here for a week, I can sit here for months and be completely content and completely happy." with my bare feet, my robes, my begging bowl, and my mind. So it's probably not recorded how much of an effect that had on the Ajatasattu, that, if you like, teaching from the Buddha. Maybe he reflected on it, but he was a difficult customer, was King Ajatasattu. But we could reflect on that story, on that teaching from the Buddha, and see it as, well, something that we too would probably have problems sitting for more than 2 hours. But we can take it as, a description of what the enlightened mind, its state of contentment, its state of happiness, without the need of any exterior thing to keep it distracted, fed, or whatever. Okay. So, the king and the Buddha and the state of contentment. So that's something for us to reflect on, imagine, and be inspired by, hopefully. But before I go, a couple of other things I want to say. I want to emphasise, as mentioned it at the beginning, that this state of contentment, maybe the state that the Buddha was alluding to as being his state of consciousness, is not a static state. It's not a passive state. Okay, it's not a state of acquiescence and just gazing at your navel or whatever, or dreaming away in lotus land. It's actually a responsive state, and in fact it's the highest state of, it allows for the highest state of responsiveness possible. Now, there's an image for this which hopefully will sort of at least explain this, perhaps. Okay. All right. I'm going to take a risk here. I'm going to use some props. I don't know if this will work, but here we go. Okay. So there's an image of the enlightened mind, a traditional symbol for it, if you like, which is that it's like a perfect sphere on a perfect plane. Okay, so I've got here a very imperfect plane, and I have actually a very imperfect sphere, but it's the only ball I could find. So here we have, okay, so our normal minds are not a perfect plane, and our ball, you see that, and our mind is not a perfect sphere either. Our ball of our mind, the sphere of our mind, runs in grooves of habit, conditionality, and it's sort of not very easy to make it run in certain directions, and in fact it runs away with us in other directions. Okay, use your imagination with this. Okay. So that's the sphere of our normal mind in the conditions of our normal conditioned way of being, of life. Okay, it's not free. Now this image, here we have, well, it isn't a perfect plane and it isn't a perfect ball, but I do. Here is, we imagine, a perfect sphere on a perfect plane. That's the enlightened mind. So the enlightened mind is quite happy in itself to just sit there all day long, all year long even, as the Buddha said, if necessary. Well, but the fact that it's a perfect sphere and a perfect plane means that in fact it's free to move in any direction. And it's free to move in response. So it can move this way, it can move that way, it can move that way, it can move that way. It has no inherent bias to it to want to move in any one particular direction or in any one pattern of thought. It's completely free to creatively respond to the world and respond in the way that's appropriate to that need out there in the world, rather than running on its habitual grooves. Okay. Yeah, well, I hope you got that. My screen went blank just then, but anyway, use your imagination on that one. Okay, the perfect sphere on a perfect plane doesn't need, from its own volition, from its own needs, from its own cravings or aversions or views to move, but that leaves it free to move towards the need, to respond to the need in others. And that's probably a way of thinking of what true compassion is, karuna, compassion. That responsiveness, it's compassion. That responsiveness is loving kindness that Karan talked about in the first of our sessions. And any small degree of true contentment, even little moments of it, will be the basis of thoughts, words and acts of loving kindness and generosity that we're able to offer to ourselves and to others and to the world. So we would find ourselves just that little bit more able to go out to others, not on the basis of what's in the situation for us or what they can do or what they have to give us, but a genuine, spontaneous responsiveness that goes out to others. And just as we have those subtle, maybe moments of contentment, we might have those sometimes subtle, sometimes not, responses in ourselves to do that seem to come from nowhere, that are just pure kindness, pure generosity. Okay, so there's actually always some sort of feedback process in our practice. Because even if we don't feel that spontaneous kindness and generosity, we can make an effort. We can make an effort to make those actions, to go out in our mind, in our speech, in our actions to others. And in making that effort, we might find that despite the external constrictions and shortages and the physical distancing that we're surrounded by, that we're in and is part of our lives right now, we can, in that feedback way, experience something of that seemingly elusive and ever needed and wanted quality of contentment. So, why not try it and see? Okay, good night, goodbye, whatever time of day you're watching this, and keep in touch with us, keep in touch with each other, okay, and look out on the website, the newsletter, any email correspondence for anything else that might be coming to you from the Vajrasana Broadcasting Centre, okay, the VBC, okay, farewell, take care and stay well.